Hey everyone, David C. Anderson here, coming at you from the Knife Center, and welcome to Knife AQ episode 103, the knife series where I answer all your questions, whether they're sharp or dull. And this week, amongst our questions, we're going to be finding out that despite all the latest innovations in the knife world, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Let's get into it. All right, if you're new to this series, the deal is you folks get to leave your questions, please, in the comments section below. We go through and pick out a few to answer in future episodes. First question this week comes from Houston R. Lamb. He says, why do you think that the Seax has fallen out of favor as a utility knife, given its long history as both a utility and fighting knife from the Dark Ages through the Crusades? Well, I would say actually that I don't think it has fallen out of favor. It just looks a little bit different nowadays. First, let's think about the word Seax. It's an Old English word, S-E-A-X, sometimes spelled a little bit differently. It's just the word for knife. But just like the Finnish puukko is the Finnish word for knife, just like that, we kind of have this idea in our heads of what specific blade type we're talking about when we mention Seax. And we have an image right here that will kind of show that kind of broken backed Seax is the kind of like the full terminology of the style we think of nowadays. Essentially, back in the day, metal was expensive, and if you had a sword that broke, you could still use it as a smaller blade, hence the broken backed, quote unquote, nature of it. And nowadays, since we're not actually making swords and then cutting them down into our pocket knives, we can kind of make them look like whatever they want. So they don't often look like a broken backed design because why?
They're not broken.
They're not broken. We can make them look however we want while still maintaining kind of the qualities of what made that style of Seax useful. One example that does look kind of like a broken backed design, the Artisan Cutlery Proponent, Knife Center exclusive here with M390 steel, has that straight off, like sheared off look to the blade. And that maintains it, even though we're going to call this a Wharncliffe nowadays, or sometimes the modified Wharncliffe is something like the Kershaw Leek. If you think about it, is kind of Saxy. It's always a fun word to say. But you mentioned, why is it fallen out of favor as a utility knife? I think that blade style is, even today, the most widely used blade shape across the world as a utility knife. In fact, what is this but not a double-ended Seax blade? This common hexagonal utility knife blade.
Easily broken too.
There you go. And you have the breakaway ones beyond that.
Indeed.
So that's what I mean when I say I don't think they actually have fallen out of favor. Like I said, they just look a little bit different, but it's more of the same. And that's what I mean by the intro there. Like the more things change, the more they stay the same. The same shapes that work have been working for a long, long time. Such as this. The paring knife actually is another perfect example. That shape, that small kitchen knife, even before we called it a paring knife, has been useful for nearly as long as man has been shaping tools and cutting things. That shape just plain works, as does the Seax. So that's my dissertation for today, perhaps.
That was a long way of saying you don't want to say reverse tanto.
You just had to do it, didn't you?
It's in my contract.
Why can't we lose that to the annals of history? Like, get rid of that. Anyway, next question comes from Siwoo Eat You. I love my Knife Center exclusive Artisan Cutlery Proponent. Hey. And I'm just infatuated with the style of big old titanium frame lock with an upgraded blade. Are there any other knives like it that I could add to my collection? Bonus question, my wife is looking for an elegant flipper tab, assisted / automatic, finger safe locking, everyday carry. Any recommendations? Well, let's start with your first thing. And if you love the overbuilt, tanky nature of this proponent and you want something more, well, we got to go straight to the top. Let me tell you, my friend, about Rich-Made knives. That do it for you? I mean, this makes this proponent look positively tame, wouldn't you say? There you go. Definitely more of a handmade nature and sort of a intentional crudeness a little bit to the finishing on these Rich-Mades. This one right here is the large zombie killer flipper, $9.25 for it. And this is one where it is drop shut, like it'll go on its own, but I want to be so careful every time I close one of these because
it's a drop shut guillotine.
If you misjudge that a little bit, you're losing a fingy tip for sure. But how cool is that, huh? Check out Rich-Made. We have a few of their things in stock right now, and they are highly, highly cool. Now, as to your bonus question, I have some thoughts. First, you say flipper tab and assisted or automatic. Well, you're not going to find a flipper tab auto because they kind of preclude one another. If you hadn't said finger safe, I would have mentioned one of the Santa Fe Stoneworks versions of the Kershaw Leak because they are elegant. They've got the flipper tab. They are assisted. And we just happened to focus on the Leak earlier this week, so it's kind of at the top of my mind. So immediately, bam. But it has a frame lock, so it doesn't have that finger safe nature that lets you keep your fingers out of the blade path when closing. I thought of perhaps the Benchmade Arcane. We'll put a picture up here because I don't have one in front of me. Maybe, not quite super elegant, but you've got a flipper tab, you've got the axis assist, so it's finger safe. And yeah, elegance the question mark. Do you think this is an elegant look? I kind of do, but I could also see where it might be a little too aggressive looking. So I had one more. It doesn't have a flipper tab, but it is an auto. The ProTech Sprint. We've got a few customized versions in right now. They're a little pricey. This one right here is about $640. S35 blade, 2 inches long, but check out the inlay there. It is abalone. We've got a bronze titanium handle, milled pocket clip on the back, which is also deep carry, not a common combination right there. Very, very sweet little knife. And despite the small size, you've still got pro tech action right there. Very cool. Check those out, perhaps. Hope that helps. Any other suggestions from the comments section, I'd say throw those below. It's kind of a slim pickings list right there, so hope that helps. All right, next up, Chris J. What's a swedge for? Is it just decorative or is there a point, quote unquote? I see what you did there. Yes, there is a point, and there's kind of two things to talk about when we're talking about swedges, but they both revolve around reducing friction. So if you're unfamiliar with what a swedge is, you can find it right here on something like this K-Bar D2 Extreme fixed blade. And that's this ground section of the spine of the knife. And the first friction reducing element is, when done right, it can thin out the metal behind the point. So there's less when using it on a knife like this type of military knife that might be used for piercing. More efficient at that means less effort exerted to pierce. Here's where things take a little bit of a caveat when we're talking about production knives. We see this kind of all over the place. You know, many companies wind up doing this way. You can see the swedge on this knife doesn't actually come all the way to the tip. So while, yeah, it's removing a bit of thickness of the spine here, it's not actually making the point or the tip itself any more acute or any more piercing ready, just removing some of the friction behind that. Like I said, we see that all over the place. An example, actually, this ProTech is perfect when it's done. I don't want to say when it's done right, because the way the K-Bar is doing it is not technically wrong, but you can see the line of that swedge on that ProTech coming right to the tip. So you're really angularizing the point of that blade even more, making it that much more efficient at the piercing tasks. The other thing a swedge can be useful for is removing drag, removing friction along the spine, not in a pierce, but in other types of cuts. Think of it like a airplane wing. You've got this edge here that as you're moving around, moving through some things, there's less drag. And even more readily apparent is when you look at a knife like this CIVIVI Badlands Vagabond with a full spine length swedge essentially. You've got a lot of reduction of friction right there. And it works even in a straight push cut because the fullest thickness of the blade itself only happens kind of along one point, as opposed to a whole kind of flat bevel you might see on something like that Kershaw Leak, which still has a swedge out here near the tip, but you take my meaning. And yeah, a little bit more efficient there, definitely more efficient if you're needing to make any kind of curved cut around something. That's going to come into play much more readily. So that is the point of a swedge. All right, now we come to our lightning round for today, which all are kind of in response to this knife right here. This, if you hadn't seen last week's FAQ, go check it out. We dyed the white FRN scales of this knife to look like a piece of candy corn. It was a lot of fun to do, and it generated a lot of comments. So we're gonna go through a couple of them. Unfold, as far as scale dyeing goes, could you not mask off sections using tape and then apply the dye using a sponge or brush if you're trying to get a multicolored end result? Or does the dye only take if submerged for a period? As for the tape, I haven't tested this, but I was a little worried about two things, about the dye soaking through to what was underneath, but also when you're dealing with a knife with texture, you're not probably gonna be able to get a good seal anyway. As for dipping and brushing, or brushing on, the dye to work on this sort of thing has to be kept at a pretty high temperature, and by the time you dip, come out and start to brush, it's honestly not gonna be hot enough. Even if it was, you're not gonna get an even coverage because you're gonna be going over the lines, and the more dye you put on, the darker it gets. So you're gonna have a lot of overlap, and you're not gonna get a clean result such as this, unless you actually dip.
Unless that's what you're looking for.
If that's what you're looking for, cool, but it's not gonna work anyway, so it's not gonna be hot enough.
Keep the room hot.
It's gonna be really hot. Anthony Michelli, not sure. Pro tip, don't use hot glue for your masking material, which is what we used. Use nail polish. It works very well even in the hottest pots of RitDye. Cool tip. Plus, it's very easy to remove with acetone or nail polish remover. So I've used acetone on G10 before when I make my own knives, and no problem. However, if you're starting with any kind of plastic, such as the FRN, fiberglass reinforced nylon here, acetone can do some pretty nasty things to plastic-like materials. Eat it up, warp it, that sort of thing. So stay away if you're doing that, I would say for sure. The other thing I wouldn't want to use nail polish on would be micarta, especially if it's not a high polished finish, because that'd be a bear to clean up, I think, even with acetone. But I've used acetone on micarta too. It doesn't hurt things for me, so. Cool tip though. Veni says, for another Halloween themed knife, maybe the CRKT Crossbones. Cool knife, but Crossbones seems a little more pirate themed to me. But several.
I saw some pirates.
Well, sure, but that's not a Halloween theme necessarily. A few people threw the Crossbones suggestion out there, so figured I'd bring it up. Now we come to our last question of the day, which is, of course, our most serious question of the day, which comes from Scubart Diver. I wear a suit and tie every once in a while. Do you have any suggestions for a knife that could be used as a tie clip and be worn as an accessory for this form of clothing? Although I am a knife nut and enjoy more high-end materials and do not mind spending money on quality, the knife should not be more expensive than Thomas's truck. We'll get to that in a minute. So my first thought was CEO Compact from CRKT. It's got this nice, clean, deep carry clip. That would work pretty well. Could be a little longer maybe. But you said maybe you want to spend a little more money. Thomas, how much is your truck?
$1,500.
Ooh, perfect. This knife is not more expensive than Thomas's truck. It's $5 cheaper than Thomas's truck, in fact.
Well, bargain.
thinking of wearing a tie, why not something from Brian Tie himself? Which led me to thinking, oh, there's the CRKT, the tie tack. Perfect. They don't make the tie tack anymore. Also, it's not a higher end knife. So how about this twist tie, OTF, $1,495 right now. And how cool would that clip right there look? Poking out next to, or on top of your fancy necktie. You got a Damasteel, or milled Damasteel clip with, man, it looks like a synthetic ruby as a ball bearing there. I'm not sure what the material is actually. You're gonna have a little bit of handle sticking out because it's not a deep carry clip, but come on. There you go. Hope that helps. You're just looking at that and thinking of the collateral next to your truck right now.
It probably has better mileage.
Yeah, probably. That's all we've got for today, folks. Make sure to leave your questions down in the comments so we keep this series going. If you want to get your hands on any of these knives, check out the links in the description. Those will take you to KnifeCenter.com. And while you're there, don't forget about our Knife Rewards program, because you got to buy a knife, right? Might as well earn some free money to spend on your next one while you're at it. I'm David C. Anderson from the Knife Center. That's Thomas behind the camera. We're signing out. See you next time.